Priestly, a Dvar Torah for Parashat Tetzaveh. This week's video is a direct continuation of what we learned last week. If Parashat Torah deals with Moshe Rabbeinu's part in building the Mishkan, Parashat Tetzaveh speaks about Aharon and his priestly son's part. Unlike the Christians' division that ends Perek Afchet with a commandment to the Israelites to take olive oil so that Aharon could light the candles, meaning adding Aharon into last week's parasha, Chazal and the previous parasha before the Cohanim's role. There is no shortage of evidence to show that Aharon and his sons are the center of this week's Torah portion. If no one was mentioned in the previous parasha, this week Aharon and his sons are mentioned dozens of times. The previous parasha dealt with the Mishkan and the general tools, whereas this one deals with the priestly garments intended for the individual priest, which they actually wear, and the initiation ceremony of the priests themselves. And after saying this, there is a point that doesn't quite fit the narrative. For some reason, two tools are mentioned only after the consecration of the Cohanim, almost as an afterthought. The Kiyor, which I'm leaving for Parashat Ki Tisa, and the golden altar at the end of this week's Parsha. The obvious question is, of course, why aren't these tools mentioned along with the other tools? And in direct regard to the golden altar, why is it mentioned among the Kohanim's initiation? To answer this question, we should start looking into the psukim about the golden altar. First, it's the first tool in which the Kohen's role is described in the commandment verse. In other words, from the verses describing the table, it's clear that someone should always place bread before God, but if it were up to me, I'd guess it's describing Moshe, because it says, "And you shall give," and it all talks about Moshe. The verses of the menorah are even more mysterious, because it cites, "And you," meaning Moshe, "shall make her candles 7, but later it's written, "And he shall light her candles," without anyone else being mentioned. Who's this mysterious he? The golden altar is the first vessel that the Kohanim's job is built in with the building commandment, and Aharon shall burn incense on it early in the morning, and when Aharon lights the candles in the evening, it will burn, and Aharon shall atone once a year on its horns. Another point, the golden altar is one of 3 vessels surrounded by a golden molding, a zer. The first is the Aharon, the ark, the second the table, and the third, as mentioned, is the golden altar. What we first said greatly strengthens the bond between the priests and the golden altar, although it doesn't really explain why. But what about the second? This is where Rashi comes to our aid. In the verses discussing the ark, Rashi says that the golden molding symbolized the Torah crown, which is logical because Moshe will then place the luchot into the ark. In the verses regarding the table, Rashi explains explicitly that the molding is a symbol for the crown of royalty, that the table symbolizes wealth and greatness, as they say, the table of kings. In the verses about the altar, Rashi simply writes a symbol of the crown of priesthood without explaining. Rashi didn't explain? Let me try. The sages in several places, for example, Avot Perek Daled Mishnah Yud Gimel, point that there are 3 crowns, the crown of Torah, the crown of royalty, and the priestly crown. According to Rashi, the zer, the molding that surrounds the Aharon, the shulchan, and the golden altar, are compared to these 3 crowns. The ark and the table are as mentioned, and the altar, the remaining crown, Keter Keuna. Why does the altar symbolize the crown of priesthood and not the other vessels? Well, the answer to this question depends a lot on how you approach it. It might be circumstantial. As we said, the golden altar is the only vessel mentioned in Parashat Tetzaveh, Parashat Cohanim. This can also be proven from the chapters discussing the construction of the temple in Sefer Melachim and Divrei Yamim. When Shlomo builds the temple, it can be seen that some of the vessels are copied, they're multiplied. Instead of 1 Kiyor in the Mishkan, there are 10 in the temple. There are 10 stands, kanim, for the Kiyor instead of 1, 10 menorot instead of 1. On the other hand, not all large vessels are copied. The golden altar stands alone. Those who don't want to accept my words as said can go to the verses in Melachim and discover that they did well because I'm wrong. The altar isn't the only vessel not mentioned to have a copy in Melachim. The table doesn't either. But a reading of Divrei Yamim reveals that Shlomo made 10 tables as well, meaning something in the verses isn't compatible. It can be argued that the reason he can duplicate tables and not altars is that the table represents royalty. So King Shlomo can and may want to duplicate using his kingly status as the builder of the Mikdash. Golden altars, on the other hand, they belong to the priests and are not his area of responsibility. The second way to answer the question of the link between the altar and the priest would be to understand the common denominator between them, but I'll leave that for another time. If you enjoyed this video, you're more than welcome to subscribe, maybe pass it on to a friend, or you could buy my book. There's a link below. I am Jovi Holtz, one who loves other times and Tanakh.